Please welcome Dr. Robert van Hille.
Good morning, everyone. First up, I'd like to apologise for not being able to be up in Joburg to present this in person. Strange times we live in. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Gert and the team at Safripol for inviting me to present an overview of the research that we did for Polyco looking at the recycling rates of HDPE dairy packaging. I hope you'll find this presentation interesting. So, as mentioned, this research looked at HDPE dairy packaging with the view of understanding recycling rates and seeing how we can drive the circular economy for this material type. So we took, the aim of the research was to try and quantify material flows through the value chain to try and identify risks and opportunities to improve circularity. So we try to be as data-driven as we could in this process. So we started out by trying to quantify the amount of packaging for this category that's produced in South Africa, specifically by engaging with the two biggest converters who make this material to try and find out how much is being made, who's buying it, where's it going. And then following the packaging through the value chain, next step was to engage with brand owners to try and understand, again, who they are, how much they're making, where they're going, where the products are being sold geographically. The next step was then to look at the recycling of these materials. So who's doing the recycling, how much is being recycled, what's the recycling rate, and then finally to look at potential end-use markets for recycled HDPE. So again, who's using recyclate, where, what's the value of the recyclate and how much is being recycled. So through all the steps of the value chain, we try to identify critical challenges, but also to identify key opportunities, interventions that can be used to drive even higher recycling rates and greater value for the recycled product. So starting looking at the market size from a converter perspective, here we used data that was published in the annual Plastics SA report and also the detailed information that we got from the converters. And yeah, we're very thankful to the converters who participated, who gave us very detailed information down to SKU level. So what it showed was that packaging represents about half of the total virgin HDPE entering the market. Of that, this HDPE beverage packaging makes up about 15% of the total mass. So we're looking at just over 20,000 tonnes of material going into these products. In terms of key category drivers, the two biggest ones were milk and mass, as you can see on the graph on the right. And in combination, they make up about 57% of the packaging. The other big category is other drinks, which make up 37% when you combine them all together. That other drinks category includes dairy blends, brews, drinking yogurt, fruit juice, juice milk blends, stevia milk and flavoured milk. So it's a fairly diverse category of products going into there. And the final category is cream, which makes up a very small proportion of the packaging. In terms of looking at pack sizes, 2-litre bottles made up over 60% of the mass of packaging going onto the market. So clear dominance for that pack size. So the next step in the process was to engage with the brand owners to try and get a sense of the movement of dairy products through the value chain. We spoke to all the big retailers who have house brands in this category and also tried to engage with the big non-retail players, so the big name brands. Here, while some of the big retailers were happy to share detailed sales data with us, others were reluctant to do so, and also some of the big brands were reluctant to share detailed information with us. So in the absence of being able to get as much information as we liked, we turned to our retail volume demand tool and dug into that. So the tool was prepared by using Nielsen till scan data. So it covered the whole of formal retail and about 30% of formal wholesale. And the data covered the top 5,000 SKUs. So Small things that had volumes below about 30 or 40,000 units a year didn't feature in the tool. When we did the analysis of the tool, what became clear was that retail house brands were the biggest component, followed by some of the big name brands, Clover, Parmalat, and Danone. But if we look at the three biggest, they represented about 75% of the total HDPE beverage packaging that was going into formal retail and wholesale. So doing the same analysis with the retail volume demand tool, we looked at pack sizes. And here you can see very clearly again that the 2-litre pack size dominates in all three of the big categories, milk, mass, and drinks. And I think if you go into any supermarket and at least look at the milk shelves, you'll be able to see that quite clearly. What was interesting, however, is that based on the Nielsen data, the 2-litre pack size made up 77% of the tonnages, whereas when we looked at the detailed information from the converters, it was only around 62%. So it suggests that particularly some of the smaller pack sizes weren't that well represented in the Nielsen data, most likely because they're either not sold through formal channels or they're niche products and they didn't make the top 5,000 SKUs. So we thought it would be interesting to delve a little bit more deeply into that apparent disparity. So we looked at integrating the detailed data from the converters with the detailed data in the tool. And what it showed was that for the milk and mass categories, about 50% of the product based on our knowledge of packaging could be accounted for using the Nielsen data. And that was very similar to numbers that came out of a South African Milk Producers Association study that was done a few years ago that also looked at what proportion of the total market could be accounted for by Nielsen data. So we were comfortable with that. What was very interesting was when we looked at the drinks category, and that showed that in the big pack size, the Nielsen data was able to, covered about 58% of what we knew was going into packaging. But as you got to the smaller pack sizes, that proportion that could be accounted for in the Nielsen data dropped off substantially. So, and again, these smaller pack sizes are the ones that are most likely to end up in the environment, both because they represent less valuable products to particularly informal collectors because of the smaller size and lower weight, but also if they are, because there's a greater proportion that's not being sold through formal channels, they're likely to go into environments where there's less municipal services in place. And some of the other data that we've got looking at other material types, specifically snack packaging, showed that very different litter profiles of stuff that was sold through the formal versus the informal market. So I think what it highlighted is how valuable this distribution channel data would be when you're trying to design interventions to get things that are going into the environment out of the environment. So I think going forward, it would be really valuable to get the brand owners who make these drinks products in the smaller pack sizes. If we could get them to share data, we could get greater insights on that. Then looking at the recycling side, and here Annaby Pretorius from Plastics 911 was extremely valuable, both in providing data and in helping us to shape the questionnaires, the survey questions, and identifying recyclers. So from her study, it showed that there are 109 recyclers who are recycling HDPE. We obviously couldn't do detailed interviews with all of those, so we applied a logic-based approach to get the biggest bang for our buck. So with Annaby's help, we identified 42 small operators who do very, very low volumes, so we discounted those. We then discounted operations that don't process bottles of any sort, and that left us with 50 of the largest recyclers who process bottles. Of those, 26 were relatively small, and for their volumes, we looked at estimates based on 3 scenarios, which you'll see in more detail in the next slide. We're then left with 24 big ones. 2 of those don't do beverage bottles; they just do other types of bottles. So of those 24, of the 22 that we were left, we were able to do detailed face-to-face surveys with 16 of them, and for the other 6, we relied on Anabee's knowledge to get information. So in the end, when we looked at volumes, the detailed surveys with the largest recyclers covered about 75% of the total HDPE beverage packaging that was recycled. So yeah, the detailed interviews covered the majority of the market. So looking at what the numbers said, of the just over 20,000 tonnes that were produced, we were able to account for between 16,000 and about 17,500 tonnes based on the information that you can see in the graph on the right. So that was the detailed data from the 16 recyclers, the estimates based on actual HDPE amounts from the other 6, and then for the remaining ones, we extrapolated that data based on 3 scenarios. The first one was that 20% of their volumes were made up of beverage bottles, the second 35, and the third 50. And those are conservative because for the ones that we did get detailed data for, most of them, over 50% of their total volumes were the dairy beverage packaging. So we're fairly confident of the recycling rate of around 75%, and taking into account some losses of material through the sorting and washing process, it implies that around about 80% of this packaging is currently being collected, which is very encouraging. So some of the insights that came out of the detailed interviews that we conducted with recyclers, there were 3 things that were of greatest importance to them. The first was specifically separation of the light-coloured dairy packaging from other HDPE packaging. So that would be the darker coloured cleaning and personal care products. So about half of them separated the dairy packaging out specifically. Those that didn't said there was no financial incentive to do it. Others said that milk bottles and things have now become lightweighted to the extent that they didn't go into their processing equipment nicely, so they needed to co-process them with chopped up drums. So therefore, it wasn't worth separating. Those that do separate it tend to sell their product into specific, or sell their post-consumer resin into specific product streams for which they're able to get a premium on the price. So those who do separation, the additional cost is between about 30 cents and 2 rand per kilogram, and most of that is paying people to manually separate the things. Even those that do separation, the vast majority don't separate the lids because it's just not worth it from a time perspective. And leaving the lids on did compromise their product quality slightly. The other issue that they had was with the recently introduced coloured milk bottles, that did have a negative impact on the quality of their light-coloured recyclate. So those bottles are, in most cases, being separated out and being processed with the dark-coloured material. The second thing was material losses at the sorting and washing stage. So that's because of dirty or damaged material, or bottles that have got sand or stones or other things in. So for most people, the loss is about 10%, but in particularly bad batches, poor quality material, that loss can be up to 25%. And what was clear from the recyclers is that the best way to minimize that lost material is to intercept it before it reaches landfill. So separation at source would be a big driver towards getting better quality material. The third issue was the issue of labels. Most of the dairy packaging now comes with shrink labels, and those are preferable. It's important to have compatible materials. So PET shrink wraps are not as desirable as, for instance, an LDPE wrap. Some of the dairy packaging still has paper labels that have been glued on. That can be a problem for some of the recyclers who have less sophisticated machinery, but for those that have high-end equipment, paper labels aren't really a problem. But one consistent thread that came through from all the engagements with the recyclers was that if there was a wider range of end-use markets for post-consumer resin or recyclate, that would be beneficial to them. So looking specifically at the market, you could see from the recycling numbers that there is a strong demand for recycled HDPE, but there is potential to grow the market for higher value products. So if you look at the existing markets, the majority of the volumes are going to industrial piping and irrigation piping. And for that, there doesn't need to be separation of light colors from dark colors because it's going into typically black piping. The other big category, well, other big market for recycled HDPE that's grown a lot over the last couple of years is in retail carrier bags. All 5 of the big retailers now boast plastic carrier bags that are made from 100% recycled material. And there are a number of those that have been certified by a government agency to be 100% recycled. So that's a big market. It is a market that's potentially under threat, both from retailers moving away from plastic carrier bags into reusable bags, and also most recently from an interesting decision that came out in the budget speech to reduce the plastic bag levy for bags that are made from biopolymers. So that may shift things away from recycled HDPE going forward. But I think what's potentially more exciting is to look on the other side. There's an increasing market for increasing premium market for recycled HDPE, and that's going into FMCG packaging. Again, from a circular economy perspective, that's more desirable. So going from packaging to packaging is better than kind of downcycling from packaging to non-packaging applications. At present, it's not possible to go dairy product to dairy product because it's currently not possible to make food-grade recycled HDPE, but moving it into FMCG packaging would be the next best thing. So, and it's in that FMCG packaging space where there's greater value for the recycled material. So, yeah, the sustainability of recyclers would be significantly increased if they were able to sell more of their products into these higher value end markets. So we then again dug into our retail volume demand tool to get an estimate of what the market size in the personal care and household cleaner space would be, using estimates for mass of pack size for the major products. So we estimate that the market's approximately 10,000 tons of HDPE. So if a greater proportion of that could be shifted to post-consumer recyclate, that would create a good market for the higher value material. The other interesting thing is that Unilever brands contribute about 75%. So as an organisation, they're in a good position to drive change in this space. What it does mean, though, is that to use recycled material to make this packaging requires a light-coloured post-consumer recyclate that won't cause streaks. So that means ideally getting anything that contributes colour to the recyclates out of the mix. So separating the light-coloured bottles from the dark bottles, but also ideally taking the caps off. However, there is another potential quick win, which we put in as the white cap challenge. So if you go to a supermarket and you look at what's available in terms of milk, you'll see that just about every milk bottle has a different coloured lid. For some of the brands, the lids represent that they help to identify the product. So full cream may have a blue lid, low fat may have a red lid, fat free may have a green lid. But there isn't really consistency in lid colour between different brands. So one brand's full cream is blue, another brands for green is red. So it's not used consistently to identify product, and you can see that for most of the milk bottles in the picture, the shrink sleeve has the same color identification as the lid. So yeah, it would be a quick win and not difficult to make the change to replace colored caps with white caps and neck rings, and that would then allow those bottles to be recycled without someone manually having to remove the lids, and you then generate a product that has very little color in it, and that recyclate will be best suited for going into the manufacture of FMCG packaging. So I think that's a challenge to leave the industry with. Who would be the first company to move to white lids? And yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and I will hopefully be available to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.